The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Blackstone Media Group smelled like expensive leather and quiet desperation.
We need to
Marcus
address the
Thompson stood at the
discrepancies
head
in
of
the
the
quarterly
mahogany
reports
table, a
immediately.
USB drive small enough to disappear in his palm resting next to the laptop, while
That's the
8 board
cost
members stared
of
at the screen
institutional
behind him.
sabotage.
The presentation slide showed a single number in red. Manthon. $293. Below it, a subtitle read, Cost of Institutional Sabotage, 2019-2025. Elena Hartwell sat 3 chairs down, her navy blazer crisp against the white of her blouse. Blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked like armor. Her face betrayed nothing, but Marcus had learned to read the small tells over 6 months, the way her breathing slowed when processing difficult information, the slight tension in her jaw when holding back tears. Right now, both were happening. Victor Sterling occupied the seat opposite Elena, silver hair perfectly styled, his 58-year-old face arranged in an expression of tolerant contempt that Marcus had seen him deploy at least a dozen times in meetings. The COO's fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped abruptly. Marcus clicked to the next slide. A chart appeared, 2 lines diverging over 72 months. Blue line climbing steadily upward, red line dropping like a stone into dark water. Retention rates for diverse hires versus non-diverse hires, 2019 to present. Blue represents employees hired during Theodore Hartwell's tenure and Elena's 6-month leadership. Red represents the same demographics tenure under interim management. He didn't need to say Victor's name. Everyone in the room knew who had run operations between Theodore's retirement and Elena's ascension. Robert Chen, the board's senior independent director, leaned forward. His reading glasses caught the light from the projector. "Mr. Thompson, you're making serious allegations. I assume you have more than charts." Marcus advanced to the next slide. 23 names appeared, arranged in 3 columns. Beside each name, a hire date, an exit date, and a notation. Performance improvement plan, cultural fit concerns, communication style issues, not aligned with team dynamics. 23 employees over 6 years, hired for their qualifications, terminated or pressured to resign for coded language that, when analyzed against performance metrics, shows no correlation to actual job performance. I have signed affidavits from 12 of these individuals describing identical patterns of micromanagement, undermining of authority, and exclusion from key projects. The other 11 either declined to participate or couldn't be located. Victor's tapping stopped entirely. His voice came out smooth as oil over gravel. "This is absurd. Those employees weren't qualified for the positions they held. I have documentation supporting every termination decision." Marcus met his eyes without blinking. "I've read your documentation, Mr. Sterling. Every performance review, every improvement plan, every termination memo. The language is impeccable. The pattern is unmistakable." He clicked again. A new slide appeared, this time showing actual text excerpts from performance reviews, names redacted but dates visible. Yellow highlighting marked specific phrases that repeated across documents. Cultural fit, communication style, team dynamics. Not a good match for our environment. Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus could see her processing the information, watching her realize that the failures she'd blamed herself for, the talented hires who never worked out, the diversity initiatives that somehow always fell short, had been deliberately sabotaged. These phrases appear in nearly 9 out of 10 reviews written by Mr. Sterling for employees of color. They appear in roughly 1 out of 8 reviews for white employees. When controlled for actual performance metrics, sales numbers, project completion rates, client satisfaction scores, there is no correlation. The only variable that predicts this language is demographic information. The room had gone very quiet. Marcus could hear the ventilation system, a low hum that probably cost more per month than his rent. Victor stood up, his chair scraping back with enough force to make Patricia Wu, the HR director, flinch. I don't have to listen to this witch hunt. I've given 30 years to this company. Theodore Hartwell built this organization on standards, on excellence, and I've maintained those standards even when it wasn't popular. If that means some people couldn't meet our expectations, that's not discrimination. That's business. Marcus remained standing, his voice level and calm, the tone he'd practiced in 100 mock confrontations, the voice that said, "I am not angry, I am certain." Mr. Sterling, do you know what it costs to replace a mid-level employee? Recruitment, onboarding, lost productivity during the learning curve. The industry average is roughly 1.5 times the employee's annual salary. For senior positions, it's 2.5 times. Over 6 years, the turnover you engineered cost this company $1.8 million. That's not maintaining standards. That's sabotage. Elena's voice cut through the tension, clear and cold. Marcus, show them slide 12. He hadn't planned to go there yet, wanted to build the case more carefully, but she was the CEO, and she clearly wanted to end this now. He clicked forward through 3 slides to reach the one she wanted. A photograph appeared on screen. Victor Sterling standing in a hotel lobby with 3 men in business suits. The timestamp read 1847, 3 weeks ago. The location tag said Sheraton, Chicago. Mr. Sterling met with executives from Pinnacle Media Group 3 weeks ago. Pinnacle is our primary competitor. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. 2 days later, Pinnacle announced they'd signed the Hartwell Tech account that we'd been negotiating for 4 months. Victor's face had gone from red to white, the color draining so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. You had me followed. I had irregularities investigated. The Hartwell Tech loss didn't make sense. They loved our pitch. Marcus's campaign was exactly what they wanted. Then suddenly they went with Pinnacle, using a strategy that looked remarkably similar to the one we'd proposed. I asked our security consultant to look into possible leaks. Marcus picked up the thread, his voice still that same calm certainty. Mr. Sterling, you've been positioning yourself to replace Elena since the day she took over, undermining her hires to make her look incompetent, leaking strategies to competitors to cost her major accounts, creating enough chaos that the board would have no choice but to remove her and install you as CEO. The words hung in the air like smoke. Robert Chen removed his reading glasses, folded them carefully, set them on the table with a small click that sounded very loud in the silence. Victor, I think you should leave the room. We need to discuss this without you present. For a moment, Marcus thought Victor might refuse. The older man's hands were trembling, either with rage or fear, or both. Then he turned and walked toward the door, his gait stiff and mechanical. He stopped at the threshold, looked back at Elena. Your father would be ashamed of what you've become. He built this company on loyalty, and you're destroying it with this political correctness nonsense. Elena's voice didn't waver. My father built this company on talent and vision. You wrapped your prejudice in the language of standards and called it loyalty. Get out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were steady on the laptop, but his heart was hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. Robert Chen looked at Elena. How long have you known about this? Marcus brought me the preliminary findings 48 hours ago. I authorized the full investigation immediately. Patricia has been verifying the employment records and exit interviews. Everything he's presenting is documented and verifiable. One of the other board members, a woman in her 50s named Sharon Mitchell, spoke up. And your relationship with Mr. Thompson, the one that was leaked to the entire company 3 days ago? Marcus felt his stomach drop. This was the part he'd been dreading, the moment when his competence and Elena's judgment would both be called into question because they'd dared to feel something human in the midst of corporate warfare. Elena laid both hands flat on the table, palms down, a gesture of complete openness. Marcus and I have developed a personal relationship over the past 6 months. We were preparing to file the appropriate HR disclosure when the photographs were distributed. The relationship developed naturally, was not initiated by either of us with any ulterior motive, and has not interfered with either of our professional responsibilities. If anything, it's made both of us more effective because we've learned to communicate clearly under pressure. Sharon's expression didn't change. That's a very convenient narrative, Elena. It could also be read as a CEO showing favoritism to an employee she's romantically involved with. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Patricia Wu beat him to it. The HR director had been silent until now, but she stood up with a manila folder in her hands. I've reviewed every decision Elena has made regarding Marcus Thompson's employment. His hire was merit-based, recommended by 3 department heads who interviewed him independently. His promotion to lead the Hartwell Tech pitch came after he'd already delivered 2 successful campaigns that exceeded targets by 18% and 22% respectively. His current role as VP of Creative Strategy was recommended by the executive committee before Elena and he disclosed their relationship. Every promotion, every project assignment, every performance review has been documented and justified by measurable outcomes. If anything, Elena has held him to a higher standard than other employees to avoid any appearance of favoritism. She laid the folder on the table and looked directly at Sharon. What we have here is a CEO who maintained professional judgment despite personal feelings, and a COO who used discrimination and sabotage to undermine her authority. The relationship between Elena and Marcus is an HR matter that can be managed through proper oversight. Victor Sterling's conduct is a legal liability that could expose this company to federal investigation and millions in damages. Robert Chen nodded slowly. Patricia's right. We need to separate the issues. Marcus, thank you for your presentation. Can you give us the room? We need to discuss this as a board. Marcus gathered his laptop and the USB drive. As he walked toward the door, he caught Elena's eye. She gave him the smallest nod, barely a movement at all, but he felt it like a hand on his shoulder. Then he was in the hallway, the door closing behind him, and all he could do was wait. The corridor outside the boardroom stretched in both directions, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Chicago's skyline at noon. 42 floors up, the city looked like a model of itself. Tiny cars threading through streets, Lake Michigan a sheet of blue glass in the distance. Marcus leaned against the window, the glass cool against his back, and closed his eyes. 6 months ago, he'd been sitting in his apartment at 11:30 on a Friday night, helping Zoe with her math homework while trying not to think about the fact that he had $94 in his checking account and rent was due in 11 days. The freelance marketing work had dried up. The corporate job search had turned up nothing but automated rejection emails. He'd been 3 weeks away from having to ask DeAndre for a loan he had no idea how to repay. Then Blackstone Media had called. They'd seen his portfolio online, wanted someone who could bring fresh thinking to their campaigns. The interview had been intense. 3 rounds, 4 different department heads, a presentation assignment that took him 20 hours to complete. But they'd offered him the job. Marketing director. $78,000 a year. Health insurance. A path forward. He'd been so grateful he'd cried in the parking garage before driving home to tell Zoe. And then, 6 weeks into the job, he'd made the stupidest mistake of his professional life. The memory still made his skin hot with embarrassment. He'd been working late, reviewing campaign materials for a pitch the next morning. His phone on the desk beside his laptop. DeAndre's text coming through around 9 asking how the new job was treating him. Marcus had replied without thinking, his thumbs moving faster than his brain, intending to text his best friend about how attractive his new boss was, how he couldn't concentrate when she wore that navy blazer. Sent to the wrong contact. Delivered to Elena Hartwell instead of DeAndre Ellis because his contacts were alphabetically sorted and he'd been typing without looking. The panic had been immediate and total. His vision had actually narrowed, tunnel-like, while his heart tried to hammer its way out through his rib cage. He'd stared at the phone for a full minute, watching the message sit there with its cheerful little check marks indicating it had been delivered and read. He'd spent the entire weekend convinced he was about to be fired, had drafted and redrafted a resignation letter, had researched unemployment benefits and looked up cheaper apartments and tried to figure out how to explain to Zoe that they were going to have to move again because Daddy had been an idiot. Monday morning, 8 a.m., he'd walked into Elena's office expecting execution and received opportunity instead. Elena had been direct, professional, and surprisingly kind. Instead of firing him for his inappropriate message, she'd offered him the Hartwell Tech account, a major client looking to rebrand for younger demographics. She needed someone who understood authentic storytelling, who could make them feel something real. He'd spent the next 3 weeks working harder than he'd ever worked on anything, building a campaign from the ground up, researching until he could recite statistics in his sleep. The presentation had been brutal. Victor Sterling had interrupted him 4 times, each question designed to make him look unprepared or naive. But Marcus had been ready for every one, had numbers and examples and case studies that shut down each objection with quiet precision. And when the Hartwell Tech CEO had smiled and said the campaign was exactly what they needed, Marcus had felt something shift in his chest, like a weight he'd been carrying for 4 years suddenly getting lighter. That night, Elena had asked if he wanted to grab coffee to debrief. They'd ended up talking until nearly midnight in a diner on Clark Street, discussing not just the campaign but their lives, their fears, their private conviction that they were both somehow faking their way through careers that should have belonged to someone more qualified. Elena had talked about her father, about wondering if he'd made a mistake choosing her, if she'd be the one to destroy everything he'd built. Marcus had understood that feeling with a clarity that hurt. His own fear that he wasn't good enough, wasn't working hard enough, wasn't being the father Zoe deserved. They'd been careful after that. Professional in the office, friendly but not intimate. But there were moments, late nights when they were both still working and would end up in her office or his, going over campaigns and somehow veering into conversations about Zoe's soccer games or Elena's complicated relationship with her father, or Marcus's private grief over Lisa that never quite went away. It had taken 4 months before they'd kissed. Elena's apartment, after a celebration dinner for closing another major account. They'd both had exactly 1 glass of wine, not enough to claim impaired judgment. She'd been showing him her view of the city, and he'd been standing close enough to smell her perfume, and then somehow they were kissing. And it felt like the most natural thing in the world, and also like jumping off a cliff. But of course it had gone sideways, because Victor Sterling had been watching them the whole time, waiting for exactly this kind of ammunition. The photographs had been distributed 3 days ago. Company-wide email from an anonymous sender. Marcus and Elena leaving his apartment building at 11 p.m., her hand on his arm. Marcus and Elena at a restaurant, heads bent together over dessert. Marcus and Elena in the parking garage, standing too close. The email's text had been brief and pointed, suggesting that the CEO's judgment was compromised by mid-personal relationships that violated company policy. The response had been immediate. HR had called them both in for separate meetings. The whispers in the break room had started before lunch. Marcus had overheard 2 colleagues speculating that he'd only gotten his promotions because he was sleeping with the boss, and the words had hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. Elena had been the one to propose fighting back. She'd shown up at his apartment that night after Zoe was asleep, her eyes red, but her voice steady. She was certain Victor had leaked the photos, and she suspected he'd been undermining her since the day she took over as CEO. She'd asked Marcus to help, to look at the hiring records, the termination files, anything he could access through his system permissions, to see if there was something she was missing. Marcus had spent 2 days buried in spreadsheets and personnel files, and once he'd started seeing the pattern, he couldn't unsee it. The coded language in Victor's reviews, the identical phrasing across dozens of evaluations, the way certain employees got shuffled to the worst assignments right before performance reviews, the systematic erosion of confidence and opportunity that made talented people quit rather than fight. He'd compiled everything into the presentation that now sat on a USB drive in his pocket while the board deliberated his and Elena's future. His phone buzzed. A text from DeAndre asking how it went. Marcus typed back that he was still waiting, that they were deliberating. DeAndre asked if he was okay. He thought about that. His career was potentially over. His relationship with Elena might not survive the scrutiny. He'd just accused a 30-year company veteran of systematic discrimination in front of the board. His heart was still racing, and his hands had a slight tremor when he held them out in front of him. But he'd done what needed doing. That had to count for something. He texted DeAndre that he was good, that Zoe was asking when he'd pick her up. Marcus checked his watch. 2:15. He was supposed to get Zoe from school at 3:30. He'd be there. Might be late, but he'd be there. The boardroom door opened. Patricia Wu stepped out, her expression professionally neutral. "They want you back in." Marcus pocketed his phone and followed her inside. The board members were all seated again, Elena in the same position as before, but now her posture looked less rigid. Her hands were folded on the table, her breathing steady. Robert Chen spoke first. "Mr. Thompson, the board has reviewed your evidence and Patricia's assessment of Elena's conduct. We've also consulted with legal counsel regarding the allegations against Victor Sterling. Here's what we've decided." Marcus forced himself to keep breathing steadily. "Victor Sterling is suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation by an independent firm. If the investigation confirms your findings, his employment will be terminated, and we'll pursue recovery of damages where applicable. The investigation will also examine the Pinnacle media leak to determine if there were any violations of confidentiality agreements or non-compete clauses." Relief tried to flood through Marcus's chest, but Robert wasn't finished. "Your relationship with Elena presents an HR concern, but not an insurmountable one. We're requiring several conditions. First, your reporting structure changes. You'll report directly to the CMO instead of Elena. Second, all promotion and compensation decisions regarding your role will require approval from the executive committee, not just the CEO. Third, you'll both participate in mandatory ethics training about workplace relationships." Sharon Mitchell leaned forward. "And if either of you violates these conditions, or if we find any evidence that your relationship has compromised professional judgment, termination will be immediate. For both of you. Are we clear?" Elena spoke before Marcus could. "Completely clear. Thank you for taking the time to separate the legitimate HR concern from Victor's attempt to use it as a weapon." Robert nodded. "Elena, you've been CEO for 6 months. Revenue is up 18%. Client satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in 3 years. You've made some excellent hires, including Marcus. But you've also been targeted by someone who should have been your ally. And that's a failure of corporate culture that predates your tenure. We're giving you the authority to fix it." He stood up, and the other board members followed suit. "Victor will be out of the building within the hour. Marcus, your presentation was excellent work. Uncomfortable as hell to sit through, but excellent. Patricia will send you both the formal documentation of our decisions." The meeting dissolved into handshakes and murmured conversations. Marcus found himself standing next to Elena in the elevator down to the executive floor, neither of them speaking until the doors closed and they were alone. "We did it," she said quietly. "You did it. I just brought the evidence." "No." She turned to face him fully. "You saved my career. You saved this company from continuing to bleed talent because of one man's prejudice. You put your own job on the line to expose something that should have been caught years ago." The elevator was descending smoothly, floor numbers ticking down on the digital display. Marcus watched them and tried to process what had just happened. 30 minutes ago, he'd been standing in that boardroom, wondering if he was about to lose everything. Now Victor was being escorted out and Marcus was being told his work was excellent, and Elena was looking at him with something that might have been love or gratitude or relief or all three. I was terrified, he admitted. The entire time. I kept thinking about Zoe, about how I'd explain losing another job. You weren't going to lose your job. Even if the board had sided with Victor, you have documentation of everything. Wrongful termination lawsuit would have been ironclad. That's not the same as being employed. The elevator reached the executive floor. The doors opened. Elena stepped out first, then looked back at him. Come to my office. We need to talk about what happens next. Her office occupied a corner of the building, windows on 2 walls offering views of the Chicago River and the cluster of towers that formed the financial district. Marcus had been in here dozens of times, but today it felt different, more real, less like a stage set and more like a room where actual consequences were being decided. Elena closed the door behind them and immediately kicked off her heels, the professional armor coming off piece by piece. Victor's going to fight this. He'll hire lawyers, claim age discrimination, try to turn this into a media circus. Let him. Everything I presented is documented and verifiable. He can't argue with his own performance reviews. No, but he can make it painful. The next few months are going to be difficult. Press inquiries, legal depositions, the whole company's going to be picking sides. Marcus thought about that. The whispers in the break room. The colleagues who already thought he'd slept his way to a promotion. The inevitable speculation about whether Elena was competent or just desperate. Then we make it simple. We do excellent work. We hit our targets. We show everyone that the reason we succeeded wasn't because Victor was gone, but because he was actively sabotaging us. Elena smiled, small and tired, but genuine. You make it sound so straightforward. It is straightforward, not easy, but straightforward. We put our heads down and prove every single person wrong who thinks we can't do this. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same scent that had been in his nose when they'd kissed in her apartment 3 weeks ago. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you sent that stupid text message. I'm glad you're too competent to ignore and too stubborn to intimidate. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. She laughed, and it sounded like relief and exhaustion and something that might have been happiness trying to break through. Go pick up Zoe. Spend the evening with her. Tomorrow we deal with the fallout. Marcus wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her close and feel her solid and real against him. But they were in her office, in the building where everyone was watching, and they'd just been told that one wrong move would cost both of them everything. So instead, he just nodded and headed for the door. Marcus. He turned back. Thank you. For being brave enough to look for the truth, even when it could have cost you everything. He thought about Lisa, about the night in the hospital when she'd squeezed his hand and made him promise he'd never stop fighting for what was right, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Someone taught me that doing the right thing is never a mistake, even when it costs you. The drive to Zoe's school took 20 minutes in the afternoon traffic. Marcus spent most of it on the phone with DeAndre, explaining what had happened in broad strokes while trying not to reveal anything that might violate confidentiality agreements he hadn't technically signed yet, but definitely would. DeAndre was relieved that Marcus hadn't been fired, that Victor was suspended, that the board had approved their relationship with conditions. Man, you've got it bad, DeAndre said, laughing. 4 years I've been trying to get you to even look at another woman, and then you accidentally text your boss and fall in love. That's the most you thing that's ever happened. Marcus pulled into the school parking lot and found a spot near the pickup area. Kids were already streaming out, backpacks bouncing, voices high and excited with the freedom of dismissal. I am terrified, not of Elena, of losing her, of this not working, of Zoe getting attached and then having it fall apart. That's called being alive, brother. You can't protect yourself or Zoe from loss. You can only decide whether the possibility of happiness is worth the risk of hurt. Zoe emerged from the building, her backpack almost as big as she was, gap-toothed smile visible even from across the parking lot. She spotted the car and ran toward it, with the complete lack of self-consciousness that 8-year-olds possessed, all flying limbs and unchecked enthusiasm. Marcus ended the call with DeAndre as Zoe yanked open the back door and threw herself into her booster seat with enough force to rock the car. She was bursting with news about her day. Her science project had gotten the best grade in her class. She'd aced her math test. Tommy Henderson had tried to say she cheated, but Ms. Patterson had watched her take the test and confirmed she definitely hadn't cheated. Marcus smiled at her in the rearview mirror while pulling out of the parking lot, feeling his heart settle into something closer to normal rhythm. "That's amazing, baby. I'm so proud of you." Zoe asked if they could get ice cream to celebrate, promising she'd eat all her dinner. Marcus negotiated. They'd go home and make tacos, then walk to the ice cream place for dessert. Zoe considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice weighing constitutional law before declaring it acceptable. But she wanted 2 scoops. 1 scoop, and you help me make the tacos. Deal. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Zoe humming some songs she'd learned at school, Marcus trying to decompress from the intensity of the board meeting. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text from Elena saying Victor had just left the building, escorted by security. It was really over. Another text followed immediately thanking him for everything. He waited until they hit a red light to type back that they were partners. That's what they were. At home, Zoe dumped her backpack by the door and immediately started pulling out homework, while Marcus changed out of his suit into jeans and a t-shirt. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living room with barely enough space for a couch and a TV, but it was theirs. Rent-controlled because the building was old enough to have actual radiators that clanked in winter, windows that faced the street instead of an alley, a fire escape that Zoe liked to sit on during summer evenings, watching the neighborhood go by. Lisa had loved this place, had painted the kitchen walls yellow because she said it made mornings feel warmer. Her presence was everywhere and nowhere. The yellow walls, the photograph on the bookshelf of the 3 of them at Navy Pier, the coffee mug she'd bought on their honeymoon that Marcus still couldn't bring himself to use. Zoe spread her homework across the kitchen table while Marcus started pulling out ingredients for tacos. Ground beef, tortillas, cheese, the packets of seasoning that Lisa had always said were cheating, but that he'd never learned to replace with actual spices. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Is Miss Elena your girlfriend?" Marcus's hand froze over the cutting board. He'd been dreading this question and somehow still wasn't prepared for it. "Why do you ask?" "Because Aisha's mom said she saw you and Miss Elena at the park last weekend, and Aisha said that means you're dating. And also because you smiled different when you talk about her." He set down the knife and turned to face his daughter. She was watching him with Lisa's eyes, brown and warm and entirely too perceptive for 8 years old. "Miss Elena and we care about each other. We spend time together. And yes, that means we're dating. How do you feel about that?" Zoe tilted her head, thinking. "Is she nice to you?" "Very nice." "Does she make you happy?" "She does." "Then I think it's good." "But Daddy, what about Mommy? Doesn't she mind?" And there it was. The question Marcus had been asking himself every time he kissed Elena. Every time he felt happy without immediately feeling guilty for feeling happy. He pulled out the chair next to Zoe and sat down, taking her small hand in his. You know how Mommy had to go to heaven because she was hurt in the accident? Yeah. Well, before she went, she told me something really important. She said that love doesn't run out, that loving someone new doesn't mean we stop loving the person who left. It just means we have more love to give. Zoe's eyes were getting shiny. She didn't cry much anymore about Lisa. The grief had dulled to something she carried rather than something that knocked her down. But moments like this still brought it back. So, you still love Mommy? Every single day. And I always will. But I can also love Miss Elena. They're different kinds of love, but they're both real. Can I still love Mommy and also like Miss Elena? Baby, you can love anyone who deserves your love. There's no limit. Your heart's big enough for everyone who's good to you. Zoe thought about that while absently doodling on the edge of her math homework. Okay, but if Miss Elena ever makes you sad, I'm gonna tell her she has to be nicer. Marcus laughed and pulled his daughter into a hug. Deal. Now come help me brown this meat so we can eat before midnight. They worked together in the kitchen, Zoe standing on a stool to reach the stove while Marcus supervised and made sure she didn't burn herself. She talked about school, about the science fair coming up, about whether she should do her project on volcanoes or space. Marcus listened and made the appropriate encouraging sounds while his mind kept drifting back to the boardroom, to Victor's face when he realized he'd been caught, to Elena's quiet gratitude in the elevator. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Elena saying the investigation firm was starting Monday and wanted to interview him first, asking if he was comfortable with that. He typed back one-handed while flipping tortillas that he was completely comfortable, that he'd make time whenever they needed. Elena responded that he was amazing, that she didn't say it enough. He told her she said it plenty, then suggested she go home and get some rest. Tomorrow was going to be intense. They ate tacos at the kitchen table, Zoe carefully constructing hers with the precision of an engineer building a bridge. She'd gotten that from Lisa, the need to make things perfect before she could enjoy them. Marcus was the opposite, had always been content with good enough, which probably explained why his tacos looked like they'd been assembled by someone wearing oven mitts. After dinner, they walked 3 blocks to the ice cream place. The evening was warm for September, the kind of weather that Chicago only offered in transition between summer's heat and autumn's chill. Zoe got chocolate chip in a sugar cone. Marcus got coffee in a cup. They sat on a bench outside the shop, watching people walk by, licking their ice cream before it could melt. Daddy, do you think Mommy can see us right now? Marcus looked up at the sky. No stars visible through the city's light pollution, just the fading purple of dusk and a few clouds catching the last rays of sun. I don't know, baby. But I think if she can, she's proud of you, of how smart you are, and how kind you are, and how brave you've been. Even though I'm eating ice cream before bedtime? Especially because you're eating ice cream before bedtime. Your mom loved breaking rules when it made people happy. They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence. On the walk home, Zoe slipped her hand into his, the gesture so casual and trusting that it made Marcus's throat tight. This was what mattered, not the board meetings or the corporate politics or even the relationship with Elena. This small hand in his, this child who trusted him to keep her safe and happy and loved. Back at the apartment, Zoe went through her bedtime routine with minimal protest. Teeth brushed, pajamas on. A chapter from the book they were reading together. Some fantasy thing about dragons and wizards that Marcus couldn't keep straight, but that Zoe loved. Then lights out, except for the nightlight that cast star patterns on her ceiling. Good night, Daddy. Good night, baby. Love you bigger than the sky. Love you bigger than the universe. It was their ritual, had been since Lisa died. finding ways to quantify the unquantifiable, making the immeasurable concrete enough to hold on to. Marcus closed her door halfway, the way she liked it, and retreated to the living room. His laptop was still sitting on the coffee table where he'd left it that morning, a lifetime ago. He opened it and stared at the screen, knowing he should work on the campaign brief that was due Friday, knowing he should review the investigation timeline that Patricia had sent, knowing he should do literally anything productive. Instead, he pulled up the photo folder on his desktop, the one labeled Lisa, opened it and let the images fill the screen. Lisa at their wedding, laughing at something the photographer had said. Lisa pregnant with Zoe, glowing and enormous and complaining about her swollen feet. Lisa and baby Zoe in the hospital, both of them looking exhausted and perfect. Lisa and 4-year-old Zoe at the zoo, making faces at the monkeys. Lisa and 6-year-old Zoe baking cookies, flour everywhere, both of them covered in it and grinning. The last photo, taken 3 days before the accident. The three of them at Navy Pier, the Ferris wheel behind them, Zoe between them holding both their hands. They looked happy. They looked like a family that would last forever. Marcus closed the laptop and sat in the dark, letting the grief wash over him. It came in waves still. 4 years later, sometimes days would pass without him thinking about her. Then something would trigger it. A song, a smell, the way evening light slanted through the kitchen. And suddenly, she was everywhere and nowhere, present in her absence. His phone lit up on the coffee table. Elena calling. Hey. Hey. I know it's late. I just wanted to hear your voice. It's not late. Zoe just went to bed. How is she? Good. Asked if you were my girlfriend. Gave her approval as long as you don't make me sad. Elena laughed, soft and tired. I'll do my best, though I can't promise the next few months won't be rough. Rough I can handle. It's dishonest I can't deal with. Then you're in luck. I'm pathologically honest. My father used to say it was my biggest weakness as a businesswoman. Your father was wrong about a lot of things. Silence on the line, but not awkward. Comfortable. The kind of quiet that meant they were both just being present with each other. Marcus, what you did today, standing up in that boardroom and presenting evidence that could have gotten you fired, that took real courage. It took desperation. I couldn't watch Victor destroy you and stay silent. It was more than that. You believe in something. In fairness, in justice, in the idea that systems should work for everyone, not just the people who look a certain way or come from a certain background. That's rare. Marcus thought about his mother, about the stories she'd told him growing up, about her father who'd been denied promotions for 30 years because his name was Marcus Washington, and the company didn't promote black men past a certain level, no matter how qualified. About his grandmother who'd cleaned houses for white families who never learned her name, just called her the help. About all the indignities and injustices that had shaped his family's story and taught him that silence was complicity. Someone has to believe in it. Otherwise, nothing ever changes. That's what I love about you. You actually believe the world can be better. The word love hung in the air between them. She'd said it casually, wrapped in a broader sentence, but Marcus felt it settle in his chest like a weight or a promise. Do you? Love that about me? A pause. Then, yes, among other things. What other things? Fishing for compliments, Mr. Thompson? Absolutely. I just took on a 30-year company veteran in front of the board. I think I've earned some ego boosting. She laughed again, and he could picture her in her apartment, probably curled up on her couch with a glass of wine, the city lights spread out behind her. Fine. I love that you're a good father, that you make Zoe laugh, that you care about your work, but not more than you care about people. That you look at me like I'm competent and beautiful at the same time, which is not a combination I'm used to. That you sent me the most inappropriate text message I've ever received and then turned it into the best thing that ever happened to me. Marcus felt his throat getting tight. Elena. Yeah? I love you too. Not just things about you. You. All of it. The silence this time was different, weighted with significance. They'd been dancing around it for months, this knowledge that what they had was bigger than attraction or companionship. But saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Well then, Elena said finally, her voice unsteady. I guess we're doing this. I guess we are. It's terrifying. Completely. But worth it. Marcus looked around his small apartment. At the yellow walls Lisa had painted. At Zoe's backpack by the door. At the laptop full of memories and the phone connecting him to a future he hadn't known he wanted. Yeah, worth it. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. About the investigation timeline and the meeting Patricia wanted to schedule and whether Marcus needed to hire a lawyer just to be safe. About Zoe's science fair project and Elena's complicated relationship with her father, and whether they should try to keep their relationship quiet for a few more weeks or just accept that everyone knew and move forward openly. Eventually, Elena yawned, apologized, yawned again. I should let you sleep. Probably, though I'm not sure sleep is happening tonight. Too much adrenaline. Try anyway, tomorrow we start rebuilding. After they hung up, Marcus sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about rebuilding. About how you take something broken, a company, a heart, a life, and make it work again. About whether the cracks ever fully healed or if you just learned to live with them, building around the damage until the structure was strong enough to stand. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from Elena thanking him for being brave, for being himself, for letting her be part of his life. He typed back thanking her for seeing him. Not just the employee or the single dad or the guy who sent her an embarrassing text. All of him. Then he closed his laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring investigators and questions and the slow, painful work of exposing Victor's sabotage in detail. But tonight, he'd done something that mattered. He'd stood up in a room full of powerful people and told the truth, even when it could have cost him everything. Lisa would have been proud. Zoe would grow up knowing her father fought for what was right, and Elena would be there beside him, fighting her own battles, building her own version of better. That was worth every risk, every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty. In the morning he'd wake up and face whatever came next, but tonight he let himself feel proud. Scared, yes. Uncertain, absolutely, but proud. He'd done the right thing, and sometimes that was enough. The investigation team arrived Monday morning at 9 sharp, 2 people in business formal carrying leather portfolios that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Caroline Webb, workplace culture consultant. The man was James Rivera, employment attorney specializing in discrimination cases. They set up in the large conference room on the 38th floor, the one with frosted glass walls that let light through but kept conversations private. Marcus was their first interview. He'd dressed carefully that morning, navy suit, white shirt, conservative tie, the uniform of someone who wanted to be taken seriously. Patricia Wu from HR sat in on the session, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, even though Dr. Webb was recording everything on a digital device that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. Dr. Webb opened a folder thick with documents. Mr. Thompson, we've reviewed the presentation you gave to the board. Very thorough work. Walk us through how you discovered the pattern in Mr. Sterling's performance reviews. Marcus had prepared for this, had spent the weekend organizing his thoughts into a coherent narrative that didn't make him sound like he'd been conducting a witch hunt. I was looking at hiring data for a campaign we're developing that targets diverse demographics. I wanted to understand our company's track record with diverse hiring so I could speak authentically to the client about our commitment. The retention numbers didn't match what I'd observed during my time here. We hire well, but people leave fast. That disconnect bothered me. Rivera leaned forward slightly. So you started digging into personnel files. Did you have authorization to access that level of detail? I had access to aggregate data through my role. Individual performance reviews became accessible when Rosa Martinez from HR shared files she'd been maintaining independently. She'd been documenting concerns for 3 years but hadn't felt safe bringing them forward without support. Why didn't she feel safe? Marcus chose his words carefully. Rosa is a Latina woman in her 50s working in a department controlled by someone who had demonstrated, through his actions if not his words, that certain people didn't belong in certain roles. She saw what happened to employees who pushed back against Mr. Sterling's decisions, reassigned to worse projects, subjected to increased scrutiny, eventually managed out. Dr. Webb made a note. We'll be speaking with Ms. Martinez this afternoon. Can you provide specific examples of employees you believe were targeted? Marcus pulled out his own folder, pages he'd organized by case. For the next 90 minutes, he walked them through 23 employment histories. Hire dates, performance metrics, project assignments, review language, exit interviews. Each one a story of someone who'd arrived qualified and left defeated. Jamal Washington, hired as a senior analyst in 2020. Strong performance reviews from his direct supervisor. Client feedback consistently positive. But Victor's quarterly evaluations used phrases like, communication style doesn't align with client expectations, and needs to work on professional presentation. Jamal left after 18 months. His exit interview citing feelings of having to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. Maria Chen, brought in as a graphic designer in 2019, award-winning portfolio, 3 successful campaigns in her first year. Victor's reviews mentioned cultural fit concerns and difficulty adapting to team dynamics. She lasted 14 months before accepting a position elsewhere. Devin Banks, marketing coordinator hired in 2021. Degree from Northwestern, internship experience at 2 major agencies. Victor wrote that he struggled with autonomous work and required excessive guidance, but Devin's project completion rate was 94%, higher than the department average, gone in 11 months. The pattern was suffocating in its consistency. Different people, different roles, different years, but the same coded language wielded like a weapon, the same systematic erosion of confidence, the same inevitable departures. Rivera stopped him after the 14th case. These are damning. But here's what a defense attorney will argue. Victor Sterling has the right to have high standards. He has the right to manage out employees he believes aren't performing. How do you prove discriminatory intent versus simply being a demanding manager? Marcus had expected this. 2 ways. First, the language patterns are statistically significant. Nearly 9 in 10 reviews for diverse employees contain this coded language. Roughly 1 in 8 for white employees. That disparity can't be explained by coincidence. Second, the actual performance metrics don't support the reviews. When you look at sales numbers, client satisfaction, project completion rates, the diverse employees were meeting or exceeding standards. The only variable that predicts negative review language is demographic information. Dr. Webb flipped through several pages, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes sharp. You mentioned Mr. Sterling's meeting with Pinnacle Media executives. How did you become aware of that? Elena asked the company's security consultant to investigate irregularities around the Hartwell Tech account. We'd been negotiating for 4 months, had developed a comprehensive strategy, received positive feedback from their team. Then suddenly they went with our primary competitor using a remarkably similar approach. That suggested an information leak. The security consultant confirmed Mr. Sterling's meeting with Pinnacle executives occurred 2 days before Hartwell Tech signed with them. Did you see documentation of this meeting? Photographs, timestamps, location data. The consultant provided everything to Elena and the board. Rivera exchanged a glance with Dr. Webb. That moves this beyond workplace discrimination into potential corporate espionage or breach of fiduciary duty. We'll need to examine that evidence separately. For now, let's talk about your relationship with Ms. Hartwell. Marcus's shoulders tensed involuntarily. He'd known this was coming, but that didn't make it easier. What would you like to know? When did it begin? How did it develop? Did it influence any business decisions? He told them about the text message, the whole embarrassing story, about Elena's decision to give him the Hartwell project despite his mistake, about the months of working together that gradually became something more personal, about their careful attempts to maintain professionalism even as feelings developed. The relationship became romantic approximately 4 months after I was hired. We were careful to keep it private while we figured out whether it was serious enough to warrant HR disclosure. When the photographs were distributed company-wide, we immediately engaged with Patricia to formalize the appropriate protocols. Dr. Webb looked at Patricia. In your assessment, has their relationship created conflicts of interest or preferential treatment? Patricia didn't hesitate. I've reviewed every promotion, assignment, and compensation decision involving Mr. Thompson. Each one was justified by measurable performance outcomes and recommended by multiple stakeholders, not just Ms. Hartwell. If anything, she held him to higher standards than other employees to avoid any appearance of favoritism. The relationship is an HR management issue, not evidence of impropriety. The interview continued for another 40 minutes, circling back to details, probing for inconsistencies, testing the strength of Marcus's evidence. By the time they finished, it was nearly noon, and Marcus felt like he'd run a marathon while being cross-examined. Dr. Webb closed her folder. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Thompson. We'll likely have follow-up questions as our investigation proceeds. In the meantime, document everything. If Mr. Sterling or anyone acting on his behalf contacts you, inform us immediately. Marcus returned to his office and found 17 emails waiting, most of them from colleagues with carefully worded questions about the situation or recent developments. He ignored all of them and focused on the campaign brief that was due Friday, losing himself in market research and demographic analysis until the words started blurring together. Around 2, his phone rang. DeAndre. How'd it go with the investigators? 90 minutes of explaining exactly how I documented Victor's discrimination. They're thorough. You sound exhausted. I am exhausted, but it's the good kind. The I did something hard and survived it kind. Elena holding up? Marcus glanced at his closed office door. Haven't seen her since this morning. She's probably getting the same treatment. You two are going to get through this. You know that, right? Marcus wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that doing the right thing would somehow lead to a good outcome. But he'd lived enough life to know that justice and fairness weren't guaranteed, just possibilities you fought for. I know we have a chance. That's more than most people get. After they hung up, Marcus forced himself to focus on work. The campaign brief wasn't going to write itself, and proving he could maintain excellence under pressure was the only defense against whispers that he was distracted or compromised. By 6, he had a solid draft. By 7, he'd refined it into something he was proud of. He sent it to the CMO for review and shut down his laptop. Elena texted as he was packing up, asking if he wanted to grab dinner. He explained he couldn't, had promised Zoe he'd be home for her presentation practice. She was doing her science fair pitch tomorrow. Elena suggested tomorrow then, after work at his place, said she'd bring dinner. Marcus agreed, then drove home through rush-hour traffic that had thinned to merely frustrating instead of completely gridlocked. The apartment was warm when he walked in. Zoe already at the kitchen table with her presentation materials spread out in organized chaos. "Daddy, I need you to be the judge. Pretend you're Ms. Patterson and you're deciding which projects are best." Marcus dropped his bag by the door and loosened his tie. "Let me change first. Then you've got my full attention." 10 minutes later, wearing jeans and a faded Northwestern t-shirt that had been Lisa's before it became his, Marcus sat on the couch while Zoe stood next to her poster board, hands clasped nervously in front of her. "My project is called How Cherry Trees Grow. I picked this because me and Daddy planted a cherry tree in the park to remember my mom. And I wanted to understand how trees know how to grow." Her voice was stronger than he'd expected, less tentative than during their practice runs over the weekend. She walked through the stages of growth, from seed to sapling to mature tree, using drawings she'd made herself and facts she'd researched at the library. When she got to the part about how trees need both roots and branches, stability and reach, her voice caught slightly. "Trees are kind of like families. They need strong roots so they don't fall over when storms come. But they also need branches so they can grow toward the sun and make new leaves. My family has strong roots because Daddy works hard and keeps us safe. And we have branches because we're growing new things, like when Daddy met Miss Elena and our family got bigger." Marcus felt his throat tighten. She'd added that last part without telling him, integrating Elena into the metaphor of growth and family in a way that was both innocent and profound. When she finished, she looked at him expectantly. "Well, was it good?" He had to clear his throat before answering. "It was perfect, baby. Ms. Patterson is going to love it." "Really? You're not just saying that because you're my dad?" "Really. Your research was thorough, your presentation was clear, and the personal connection makes it memorable. You're going to do great." Zoe beamed and started carefully packing up her materials. "Can we have spaghetti for dinner, with the sauce from the jar that Mom used to say was cheating?" "Absolutely. You set the table and I'll get the water boiling." They moved through the evening routine with practiced ease. Dinner, dishes, homework review, then an hour of reading time before bed. Zoe had moved on from the dragon book to something about a girl detective, which Marcus found easier to follow. When he tucked her in, she grabbed his hand before he could leave. "Daddy, are people being mean to you at work because of Miss Elena?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you've been coming home tired, and you get this look on your face like when Tommy Henderson said I couldn't play soccer because girls aren't good at sports." Marcus sat on the edge of her bed. "Some people are being difficult, but not because of Miss Elena. Because I told the truth about something bad that was happening, and some people don't like it when you tell the truth." "What bad thing?" He struggled with how to explain workplace discrimination to an 8-year-old. "There was someone at my job who was treating people unfairly because of what they looked like or where they came from. I found proof of it and showed my bosses. Now that person isn't working there anymore, but his friends are upset about it." Zoe absorbed this with the serious expression she got when processing something important. "But you did the right thing." "I did." "Then the people who are upset are wrong. Ms. Patterson says that doing the right thing is always right, even when it's hard." "Ms. Patterson is a smart lady." Zoe yawned, her eyes already starting to close. "I'm glad you're brave, Daddy. It makes me feel safe." He kissed her forehead and stood up. "Love you bigger than the sky. Love you bigger than the universe." In the living room, Marcus collapsed onto the couch and pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. No voicemail. Then a text from that same number identifying the sender as Richard Vance, attorney for Victor Sterling, requesting to discuss Marcus's testimony with the investigation team. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then forwarded it to Patricia Wu with a note explaining that Victor's lawyer had contacted him and that per the investigator's instructions, he wasn't responding without guidance. Patricia replied within minutes, telling him not to engage and that she'd inform Dr. Webb and Rivera immediately. Another text came through, this time from Elena, saying Victor's lawyer had called her too and that Patricia said not to respond. Marcus confirmed he was fine, that Victor was scrambling, that they'd expected this. Elena replied that it didn't make it less stressful. Marcus agreed but reminded her they were doing the right thing. That had to count for something. His phone rang. Elena, not texting this time. "Hey, I need to hear your voice. Today was brutal." "Tell me about it." She exhaled slowly. 4 hours with the investigators. They went through every decision I've made as CEO, every hire, every promotion, looking for patterns of favoritism or poor judgment. They asked me to explain why I gave you the Hartwell project after you sent me that text. Asked if I was trying to keep you close because I was attracted to you. Asked if my feelings compromised my leadership. What did you say? That I gave you the project because you were the best person for it. That my feelings developed over time, not instantaneously. That separating personal attraction from professional assessment is something I've had to navigate my entire career because being a woman in leadership means every decision gets scrutinized through the lens of emotion versus logic. Marcus heard the frustration in her tone, the exhaustion that came from having to justify your competence over and over. They believed you? I think so. Patricia backed me up, showed them your performance reviews from before we started dating, the metrics that justified every promotion. But Marcus, Victor's going to argue that I promoted you because of our relationship. He's going to claim that my judgment is compromised and use that to attack the entire discrimination case. Let him. The numbers don't lie. I've exceeded targets on every campaign I've led. My team's satisfaction scores are among the highest in the company. He can question your motives all he wants, but he can't argue with results. You sound so certain. Because I am. We have truth on our side. That has to be enough. Silence on the line, just their breathing, the intimacy of being present even through distance. I wish you were here right now. I wish that too. But Zoe's asleep down the hall and I can't leave her alone. I know. Tomorrow, though, I'll come to you. We'll order food and pretend the world isn't complicated for a few hours. After they hung up, Marcus tried to focus on television, on email, on anything that would quiet his racing thoughts. Nothing worked. He kept seeing Victor's face in the boardroom, the moment when he realized he'd been caught, the mixture of rage and humiliation and cold calculation. That wasn't a man who would go quietly. That was someone who would burn everything down rather than accept defeat. Around midnight, Marcus finally fell asleep on the couch, the television playing some late-night show he wasn't watching, his phone clutched loosely in his hand in case Zoe woke up needing him. The next morning brought Zoe's science fair presentation. Marcus had taken a half day to attend, something he'd cleared with the CMO a week ago. He arrived at Lincoln Elementary at 1:30, the gymnasium already crowded with parents and students and poster boards showcasing everything from volcano experiments to solar system models. Zoe spotted him from across the room and waved frantically. Her poster board was set up in the third row, her cherry tree drawings visible even from a distance. She'd dressed carefully that morning, purple shirt, black pants, her hair pulled back in the way Elena had shown her last weekend when they'd practiced braiding. "Daddy, you made it!" "Wouldn't miss this for anything, baby." She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward her display, chattering excitedly about being in the second group to present and how Ms. Patterson said they'd have 5 minutes each and then judges would ask questions. Marcus promised he'd watch from the front row, teasing that he'd be the proud dad trying not to cry. Zoe giggled and said dads don't cry at science fairs. This one might. The presentation started at 2. Marcus found a seat where he could see Zoe's station clearly. She was nervous, he could tell, kept fidgeting with her index cards, checking her poster board to make sure nothing had fallen off. But when her turn came and she stood in front of the 3 judges, her voice was steady and confident. She walked them through the life cycle of cherry trees, explaining germination and growth patterns and the importance of both roots and branches. When she got to the personal section, about the tree they'd planted for Lisa, one of the judges, an older woman with kind eyes, leaned forward with obvious interest. "That's a beautiful way to remember someone important. Why did you choose a cherry tree specifically?" Zoe didn't hesitate. "Because my mom loved cherry blossoms. She said they reminded her that beautiful things don't have to last forever to matter. They just have to be beautiful while they're here." Marcus felt his chest compress. He'd told Zoe that years ago, trying to explain why Lisa's life could be cut short and still have meaning. Hearing his daughter repeat it back, integrating it into her understanding of growth and memory and family, was almost more than he could bear. The judges asked a few more questions, about soil composition, about watering schedules, about how long before the tree would produce fruit. Zoe answered each one with the confidence of someone who'd done real research, who cared about her subject deeply. When the presentations finished, Marcus found her in the crowd of students and told her she was amazing. She bounced on her toes, asking if they could go see the tree after this, wanting to check if it had any new leaves. "Absolutely. Let me tell your teacher I'm taking you early." They left the school at 3, drove to Lincoln Park where they'd planted the cherry tree 4 months ago. It had been small then, barely taller than Zoe, its branches thin and uncertain. Now it had grown several inches, new leaves sprouting along the branches in that fresh spring green that meant life asserting itself. Zoe walked around it slowly, examining every branch, announcing that it was getting bigger. Marcus agreed that trees did that. Slowly, but steadily. "Do you think Mom knows we planted it for her?" Marcus crouched down next to his daughter. "I think if there's any way for her to know, she does. And I think she's proud of you for learning about how trees grow, for caring enough to understand the science behind something beautiful." Zoe touched one of the new leaves gently, then said that Miss Elena had helped her practice her presentation and told her that Mom would be happy they were making new memories while keeping the old ones. "She's right. Your mom wouldn't want us to stop living. She'd want us to grow, like this tree. Strong roots, new branches." They sat on the grass next to the tree for a while, watching people walk by, joggers and dog walkers and parents with strollers. The afternoon sun was warm, the kind of weather that made Chicago feel like the best city in the world for the brief window between winter's brutality and summer's humidity. Marcus's phone buzzed, a text from Patricia Wu saying the investigation team wanted to interview him again tomorrow at 2 p.m., with follow-up questions about the Pinnacle Media connection. He confirmed he'd be there. Another message, this time from Elena, asking how Zoe's presentation went. Marcus replied that it was perfect, that she'd killed it, that they were at the park, now checking on Lisa's tree. Elena asked him to tell Zoe she was proud of her, and to tell the tree she said hello. Zoe was lying on her back now, looking up at the sky through the tree's branches, asking if when Marcus and Miss Elena got married, would Elena be her stepmom? The question hit him like cold water. Whoa. Who said anything about getting married? Nobody. But you love her, right? I do. And she loves you? I think so. Then you'll probably get married eventually. That's what people do when they love each other. Marcus lay down next to her, their heads touching, both of them staring up at the canopy of leaves. Getting married is complicated, baby. Especially when there's already a family involved. We'd have to make sure everyone's ready for that. I'm ready. Miss Elena is nice. She doesn't try to be Mom. She just tries to be herself. That's good. Out of the mouths of children, simple truths that adults complicated with fear and overthinking. I'll keep that in mind, but let's not plan the wedding just yet, okay? Okay, but when you do ask her, can I help pick out the ring? Deal. They stayed at the park until nearly 5, then drove home through traffic that was just starting to build toward rush hour density. At home, Zoe immediately started on homework, while Marcus began attempting to make something that resembled dinner. He'd gotten as far as boiling pasta when his phone rang. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Same number. This time he answered. Marcus Thompson. Mr. Thompson, this is Richard Vance. I'm representing Victor Sterling in... Marcus hung up immediately and texted Patricia documenting the call time and number, noting that Victor's lawyer had called directly despite him not responding to initial contact. Patricia responded within seconds, saying she was forwarding everything to the investigators and that this was inappropriate contact. If he called again, don't answer. The phone rang again. Marcus let it go to voicemail. This time Vance left a message suggesting that if they could just talk, perhaps they could find a resolution that didn't require dragging this through a lengthy investigation that would hurt everyone involved, including Marcus and Elena. His client was prepared to be reasonable. Marcus played the voicemail for Patricia over the phone. That's a threat disguised as an olive branch, Patricia said. He's suggesting that if you don't cooperate, Victor will make this painful for you and Elena. Do not engage. I'm documenting everything and sending it to Dr. Webb and Rivera. After dinner, after Zoe was settled with her reading time, Marcus sat at his laptop and pulled up the personnel files again. Something about Vance's message bothered him. The suggestion that Victor's management style was being misinterpreted, as if there was some legitimate explanation for the patterns Marcus had documented. He started digging deeper into Victor's employment history, using the limited access he still had to company records. Victor had joined Blackstone Media in 1995, hired by Theodore Hartwell himself. Started as Director of Operations, promoted to VP within 3 years, then COO by 2002. 23 years in leadership, overseeing hundreds of employees, influencing thousands of decisions. Marcus pulled up old company newsletters from the archive, back when they'd printed physical copies that someone had eventually scanned and uploaded. He found Victor's name mentioned repeatedly: employee awards, leadership recognition, instrumental in securing major accounts. Theodore Hartwell had praised him constantly in the early years. Then something shifted around 2010. The praise became less frequent. Victor's name appeared less often in company communications. Marcus couldn't find any documentation of why, just a gradual cooling of what had clearly been a close professional relationship. He dug into the business filings, public records he could access through basic searches. In 2011, Blackstone Media had settled a discrimination lawsuit filed by a former employee named Angela Morrison. The settlement terms were confidential, but the case had been filed in Cook County Circuit Court, and the initial complaint was public record. Marcus downloaded the PDF and started reading. Angela Morrison, hired in 2009 as a marketing manager. African-American woman, 34 at the time of hire. MBA from University of Chicago. She'd filed the lawsuit after being terminated in 2010, claiming race discrimination and hostile work environment. The complaint named Victor Sterling specifically, citing performance reviews that used coded language about communication style and cultural fit. It described a pattern of undermining her authority, excluding her from meetings, assigning her to low-visibility projects while giving high-profile work to less experienced white colleagues. The company had settled 6 months after filing. Angela Morrison had signed an NDA as part of the settlement, but the initial complaint was damning. And Marcus could see his own research reflected in her allegations. The same language, the same patterns, just 11 years earlier. This wasn't new behavior. Victor had been doing this for over a decade, possibly longer, and Theodore Hartwell had known about it. The lawsuit had happened on his watch, with his knowledge. He'd chosen to settle quietly and keep Victor in place, rather than address the systemic problem. Marcus's hands were shaking as he took screenshots of the court documents. This changed everything. This wasn't just about Victor's actions over the past 6 years. This was a pattern that had been enabled and protected by leadership, including Elena's father. He texted Elena saying they needed to talk tonight, that he'd found something. She called immediately asking what he'd found. Marcus said not over the phone, asked if she could come over since Zoe was almost asleep. Elena said to give her 20 minutes. Marcus used the time to organize his findings into a coherent presentation. By the time Elena knocked softly at his door, he had printouts of the court documents spread across his kitchen table. She walked in looking exhausted, still in her work clothes but with her shoes off, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. He poured her a glass of water and gestured to the table. "I found a discrimination lawsuit from 2011. Angela Morrison versus Blackstone Media Group. It names Victor specifically. The allegations are identical to what I documented. Coded language in reviews, hostile environment, retaliation for pushback. Your father settled it quietly and kept Victor in his position." Elena picked up one of the printouts, her face going pale as she read. "My father knew? He knew Victor was discriminating and he just paid her off?" The settlement was confidential, NDA terms. But the initial complaint is public record. I can't find any evidence that your father took action beyond the settlement. Victor stayed COO, kept his authority, continued the behavior for another decade. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, still holding the printout. "My father used to say that Victor was loyal, that loyalty mattered more than anything in business. I thought he meant professional loyalty. But maybe he meant loyalty to a certain way of doing things, a certain type of person being in charge." Marcus sat across from her. "Or maybe he meant Victor knew where the bodies were buried and keeping him happy was easier than confronting what he'd enabled." Elena looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My father built this company. It's his legacy. And I've spent 6 months trying to live up to that, trying to be worthy of the trust he placed in me. But if the legacy includes covering up discrimination, protecting people who harm others, settling lawsuits quietly instead of fixing the culture, then maybe his legacy isn't worth preserving." The words hung heavy in the small kitchen. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Upstairs, someone's footsteps creaked across old floorboards. The radiator clanked to life with its familiar rhythm. "What do we do with this information?" Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "We give it to the investigators. We show them this isn't just Victor's behavior. It's a pattern the company has known about and failed to address for over a decade. And then we commit to doing better, to actually fixing the culture instead of just managing the liability." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "That means confronting your father, acknowledging that his leadership had serious flaws." "I know, and that terrifies me. But you were right that first night we really talked. The only thing we can control is whether we're worth the time we're given. My father wasted his time protecting someone who hurt people. I'm not going to make the same mistake." They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped across the scattered papers, two people trying to figure out how to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. "Do you think Theodore knew the full extent of what Victor was doing?" Elena considered that. "I think he knew enough. He had to. You don't settle a discrimination lawsuit without understanding what's being alleged. But I also think he chose to believe Victor's version of events, that these were just difficult employees, poor performers, people who couldn't handle high standards. It's easier to believe that than to admit you've been enabling harm." Marcus thought about his own father, about the complicated legacy of men who tried their best and still fell short, about how you could love someone and still recognize their failures. "We're going to have to tell him we found this, before the investigators do." "I know. I'll call him tomorrow, ask him to meet me. You should be there. He needs to hear from you directly about what you found." "Elena, are you sure? This could destroy your relationship with him." She met his eyes, and in them he saw steel wrapped in sadness. "My relationship with him is already complicated. This is just one more truth we need to face. Besides, if I'm going to run this company differently, if I'm going to actually live up to the values I claim to have, I can't do it while protecting him from the consequences of his choices. Marcus squeezed her hand. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person, no. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. But that's when bravery matters most, right? When you do the right thing despite the fear. They spent another hour going through the documents, making sure they had everything organized for the investigators. Then Elena left, citing an early morning meeting and the need for at least 5 hours of sleep. Marcus walked her to the door. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Tomorrow's been hard since the day I took this job. At least now I'm not facing it alone. After she left, Marcus cleaned up the kitchen and checked on Zoe. She was sprawled across her bed, one arm hanging off the edge, her mouth slightly open in the boneless sleep of childhood. He adjusted her blanket and turned off her overhead light, leaving just the nightlight with its constellation of projected stars. In his own room, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Lisa's side had long since lost her scent, the pillow just a pillow now, no longer holding the shape of her head. But sometimes late at night, in that space between waking and sleeping, he could still feel her presence. Not haunting, just there. A reminder that he'd been loved once and learned how to love back. I'm trying to do right, he whispered to the darkness. For Zoe. For Elena. For all those people Victor hurt. I hope that's enough. No answer came, but then he hadn't expected one. The dead didn't offer guidance, they just left you with their memory and the responsibility of living well enough to honor them. His phone buzzed one last time. Elena. Thanking him for finding this, for being willing to see difficult truths and not look away. He typed back that they saw them together now. That made it bearable. Morning came too early, dragging Marcus out of restless sleep and into a day that promised nothing but difficulty. He got Zoe ready for school on autopilot, made her lunch, signed her permission slip for the field trip next week, listened to her chatter about whether her science fair project would win a ribbon. Even if it doesn't win, I'm proud of how hard you worked. But winning would be cooler. Yes, winning would be cooler. At the office by 8:30, Marcus found an email from Dr. Webb requesting he arrive 30 minutes early for his 2 p.m. interview. No explanation, just the request. He confirmed and spent the morning forcing himself to focus on work that felt simultaneously urgent and meaningless. The campaign brief had come back from the CMO with positive feedback and minor revision requests. Marcus made the changes mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Around 11, Patricia stopped by his office. Elena told me about the 2011 lawsuit. I pulled the full settlement file from archives. It's worse than the public complaint suggested. She handed him a folder marked confidential. Marcus opened it and immediately wished he hadn't. Angela Morrison had documented 18 months of harassment, detailed notes about meetings where she was talked over or ignored, emails from Victor questioning her professionalism over minor issues, a pattern of being excluded from client meetings, then criticized for not having client relationships, performance reviews that contradicted praise from her direct reports and clients. The settlement had been for an undisclosed sum, but the legal fees alone had cost the company over $200,000. Theodore Hartwell had signed off on everything, including the NDA that kept Angela from discussing her experience. There are 3 other sealed settlements in the archives, all from Victor's department, all within the past 15 years. 2 race discrimination, 1 gender discrimination. The company has paid out over $1 million in settlements related to Victor Sterling's management, and Theodore kept promoting him. Marcus felt sick. How did you not know about these? Patricia's expression was pained. I wasn't HR director until 3 years ago. My predecessor kept these files locked. I only got access because Elena gave me executive authority to review everything related to Victor. The previous director retired, took the institutional knowledge with her. I suspect she and Theodore had an understanding about what got documented and what got quietly resolved. We need to give all of this to the investigators. Already scheduled. Dr. Webb and Rivera are getting copies this afternoon before your interview. They need to understand this isn't isolated behavior. It's a pattern that was actively concealed. Marcus handed the folder back, feeling the weight of what they'd uncovered settling into his bones. Elena's meeting with her father this afternoon to tell him we found the Morrison case. How do we tell her there are 3 more? Carefully, and with the understanding that she's going to have to make some very difficult decisions about her father's legacy and the company's future. Theodore Hartwell lived in Kenilworth, one of the North Shore suburbs where old money built estates and manicured their lawns with the precision of golf courses. His house was a sprawling Tudor revival, all dark wood and leaded glass windows, set back from the street behind iron gates that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary. Elena's car was already in the circular driveway when Marcus arrived at 8:50. She got out as he parked, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like armor, her hair pulled back severely. Ready? No, but let's do it anyway. Theodore answered the door himself, which surprised Marcus. He'd expected household staff, hired help managing the daily operations of wealth. Instead, there was just a sick man in his late 60s, oxygen cannula in his nose, moving slowly but with dignity intact. Elena and Mr. Thompson, this must be serious if you're bringing your boyfriend to confront me. Elena's hands clenched briefly at her sides. This is serious, Dad. Can we sit down? He led them to a study lined with bookshelves, leather furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable, and photographs documenting a business career spanning 4 decades. Younger Theodore shaking hands with Chicago mayors, Theodore cutting ribbons at office openings, Theodore accepting industry awards. Elena spread the documents on his desk. The Morrison complaint, the 3 sealed settlements, the legal costs, Theodore's signatures on every NDA. We found these in company archives, 4 discrimination lawsuits over 15 years, all related to Victor Sterling's management, all settled quietly with NDAs to prevent disclosure. You knew Victor was discriminating against employees, and you chose to protect him rather than address the behavior. Theodore picked up the Morrison file, his hands trembling slightly. Whether from illness or emotion, Marcus couldn't tell. You don't understand the context. Angela Morrison was difficult. She challenged Victor's authority constantly, undermined him in meetings, refused to accept feedback. The lawsuit was retaliation for being managed out. Marcus spoke quietly. Mr. Hartwell, I've read the complaint. I've seen the documentation. Angela Morrison was doing her job at a high level and being punished for it. Victor used coded language to justify discrimination, and you enabled that by settling rather than investigating. Theodore's face flushed red. You've been with this company less than a year and you think you understand decades of decisions? Victor Sterling built our operations infrastructure. He was loyal when loyalty mattered. Yes, he had high standards. Yes, some people couldn't meet those standards. But I'm not going to let you destroy a 30-year career based on cherry-picked examples from disgruntled former employees. Elena's voice cut through like cold steel. Dad, stop. Just stop defending him. We have proof of systematic discrimination. 23 documented cases over 6 years. 4 lawsuits before that. Your signature on settlements totaling over $1 million. This isn't about loyalty or high standards. This is about you protecting someone who hurt people because confronting the problem was harder than paying it to go away. Theodore stood up, the movement making him wince. I built this company from nothing. I gave people jobs, opportunities, careers. I made difficult decisions to protect what I'd built. You're too young to understand what it takes to keep a business alive, to navigate relationships and politics and competing interests. Victor made mistakes, yes, but he was also invaluable. And I wasn't going to let one or two complaints destroy someone who'd given me decades of service. It wasn't one or two complaints, it was 4 lawsuits and dozens more situations that never reached legal action because people left rather than fight. You created a culture where discrimination was tolerated as long as it was dressed up in professional language. Theodore pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. This is his influence, filling your head with ideas about systemic problems and institutional failures. You never questioned my leadership before he showed up with his agenda. Marcus remained seated, keeping his voice level. Mr. Hartwell, I came to this company because I needed a job to support my daughter. I discovered the pattern of discrimination because I was trying to understand retention problems. Nobody filled Elena's head with anything. She's capable of seeing evidence and drawing her own conclusions. You're using her guilt about our relationship, her need to prove herself. You've manipulated her into attacking me so you can advance your own career. Elena slammed her hand on the desk, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Enough. Marcus didn't manipulate me. He showed me evidence I should have seen myself if you'd bothered to transition properly instead of dumping the company in my lap and retiring to nurse your wounded heart. You failed as a leader, Dad. Not because you weren't smart or strategic, but because you valued loyalty over justice and comfort over accountability. Theodore's face had gone from red to pale, his breathing labored. Is that what you think of me? That I'm a failure? I think you built something significant and compromised your values to protect it. I think you made Victor Sterling untouchable because he knew where all the bodies were buried, and removing him would have exposed your own complicity. I think you took the easy path over and over again until you couldn't see the harm you were enabling. The words hung in the air, brutal and honest. Theodore sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years plus several more. What are you going to do? Drag me in front of the board? Announce publicly that your father was complicit in discrimination? Destroy the Hartwell name to prove some point about moral superiority? Elena's voice softened slightly. I'm going to tell the investigation team everything we found. I'm going to recommend comprehensive policy changes to prevent this from happening again. And I'm going to build a culture at Blackstone Media that values justice over loyalty, that holds people accountable regardless of their tenure or relationships. What happens to your reputation is a consequence of your choices, not my actions. Theodore stared at his daughter with something between pride and devastation. You really are going to burn it all down, aren't you? No, Dad. I'm going to build something better on a foundation that doesn't include systematic discrimination and cover-ups. You can choose to support that, or you can choose to cling to a version of history that never existed. But either way, the truth is coming out. Marcus and Elena left Theodore's house in silence, driving their separate cars back toward the city. Marcus's phone rang as he merged onto the highway. Elena. Pull over at the next rest stop. I need a minute before I can go back to the office. They met in the parking lot of a highway rest area, Elena getting out of her car and walking to where Marcus stood leaning against his. Her professional mask had cracked, tears tracking through her makeup. I just destroyed my relationship with my father. Marcus pulled her close, letting her weight rest against him. You told him the truth. That's not destruction. That's honesty. He's never going to forgive me for this. Maybe not, but you'll be able to live with yourself. And 29 people who were hurt by Victor's behavior will finally get some measure of justice. They stood there for several minutes, truck traffic whooshing past on the highway, the morning sun climbing higher in a cloudless sky. The investigators are going to ask about this, about confronting my father before they could. We tell them the truth. That we found evidence of a pattern and brought it to the person most implicated before it became public. That's not hiding anything. That's giving him a chance to face it with dignity. Elena pulled back to look at him. You're too good at this. At knowing the right thing to say. I'm just good at knowing you. Come on, let's go face whatever comes next. The interview at 2 p.m. was brutal. Webb and Rivera had clearly already reviewed the settlement files and had questions about the timeline of Marcus discovering them, why he'd searched public records, what led him to suspect a longer pattern. Marcus explained that Victor's lawyer had suggested his management style was being misinterpreted, which made him wonder if there was history he wasn't aware of. The Morrison case appeared immediately when he searched for discrimination lawsuits involving the company. Rivera leaned back in his chair. Mr. Thompson, you've built a compelling case that Victor Sterling engaged in discriminatory behavior over multiple years. But now we're looking at something bigger. A company that systematically concealed discrimination, settled lawsuits to avoid accountability, and promoted the person responsible for creating a hostile environment. That implicates leadership beyond just Mr. Sterling. You're asking if I think Theodore Hartwell was complicit. I'm asking what the evidence suggests. Marcus chose his words carefully, aware that he was talking about Elena's father, the man who'd built the company she now led. The evidence suggests that Theodore Hartwell was presented with clear information about discriminatory behavior and chose to resolve it through settlements and NDAs rather than addressing the underlying culture. Whether that constitutes complicity or just poor judgment, I can't say. But the effect was the same. Victor kept his authority and continued the behavior for another decade. Dr. Webb made notes on her tablet. Ms. Hartwell wasn't aware of these settlements before you found them? No. She's been CEO for 6 months. Her father retired suddenly due to health issues. She inherited the company without a transition period or comprehensive briefing on pending legal issues. Patricia Wu only discovered the sealed settlements when Elena gave her authority to investigate Victor. And now Ms. Hartwell has to decide what to do with this information, whether to protect her father's reputation or expose the full extent of the company's failures. Marcus met her eyes steadily. Elena will do the right thing. She always does, even when it costs her. The investigation report landed on Elena's desk 6 weeks later, 347 pages documenting systematic discrimination spanning 15 years. Dr. Webb and James Rivera had been thorough to the point of brutality, interviewing 62 current and former employees, reviewing thousands of documents, analyzing statistical patterns that left no room for ambiguity. The report's findings were stark and methodical. Victor Sterling had created and maintained a hostile work environment. Theodore Hartwell had enabled that environment through inadequate oversight and a consistent pattern of prioritizing institutional reputation over individual justice. The report recommended immediate termination of Victor Sterling with cause, forfeiture of severance, and referral to the Illinois Department of Human Rights for potential civil violations. It also recommended an independent review of Theodore Hartwell's tenure as CEO to determine the full scope of leadership failures. Elena called Marcus after reading the entire document in one sitting. It's worse than we thought. They found 6 more cases we didn't document. People who left before filing complaints, who were paid informal settlements, who just disappeared from company records. How many total? 29 documented cases of discriminatory treatment, 6 lawsuits over 15 years. Estimated total cost to the company, including turnover, settlements, and lost productivity, $3.2 million. The number felt both impossibly large and grimly specific. What happens now? Emergency board meeting tomorrow. They'll vote on the recommendations. Victor's termination is essentially guaranteed. The evidence is too clear. But they're also going to discuss my father's role, whether he should face consequences, whether the company needs to make a public statement about institutional failures. The board meeting convened at 9 a.m. in the largest conference room, every seat filled, several members attending remotely via video conference. Marcus sat in the back row with Patricia Wu and Rosa Martinez, the three of them functioning as witnesses rather than participants. Dr. Webb presented her findings with clinical precision, walking the board through 15 years of documented discrimination. Charts showing demographic disparities in hiring, promotion, and retention. Graphs illustrating the coded language patterns. Testimony excerpts from former employees describing identical experiences years apart. When she reached the section about Theodore Hartwell's role, the room's energy shifted. Board members who'd been taking notes stopped writing. The ones on video screens leaned closer to their cameras. Theodore Hartwell was presented with clear evidence of discriminatory behavior through 4 separate lawsuits between 2008 and 2019. In each case, he chose to settle with confidentiality agreements rather than investigate the underlying conduct. He promoted Victor Sterling to Chief Operating Officer in 2002 and maintained him in that position through multiple discrimination complaints. While Mr. Hartwell may not have personally engaged in discriminatory behavior, his leadership enabled and protected someone who did. Robert Chen cleared his throat. Dr. Webb, are you recommending action against Mr. Hartwell? I'm recommending the board acknowledge that institutional failures occurred at the highest level of leadership. Whether that acknowledgement includes formal consequences for Mr. Hartwell is a decision for the board to make based on your governance standards and legal considerations. The room erupted into overlapping conversations. Some board members wanted Theodore stripped of his emeritus status. Others argued he'd already retired, that punishing him now served no purpose. A few suggested the situation was being blown out of proportion. Elena sat at the head of the table, her breathing steady and controlled, listening to them debate her father's legacy like it was an abstract problem rather than her actual life. Finally, she raised her hand for silence. I need to say something before we vote on anything. The room settled. Every eye turned toward her. Theodore Hartwell is my father. He built this company and gave me the opportunity to lead it. I love him and I'm grateful for what he created. But Dr. Webb's findings are accurate. My father knew about Victor's discriminatory behavior and chose to protect the institution over the individuals being harmed. That was wrong. It was a failure of leadership and a betrayal of the values this company claims to hold. Sharon Mitchell leaned forward. Elena, you're asking us to condemn your own father. I'm asking us to acknowledge truth. My father made choices that enabled harm. Those choices had consequences for real people. Angela Morrison, the others named in lawsuits, the 29 cases documented in this report, and probably many more who never came forward. Protecting his reputation isn't more important than establishing accountability. Robert Chen nodded slowly. What are you proposing? Elena took a breath, the kind that steadied you before jumping off something high. Immediate termination of Victor Sterling with cause, no severance, referral to state authorities for investigation. Public acknowledgement that the company failed to address discriminatory behavior over multiple years. Establishment of an independent oversight committee to review all employment practices. Mandatory training for all managers on recognizing and preventing discrimination. And a formal statement acknowledging that Theodore Hartwell's leadership, while successful in many ways, included serious failures in protecting employees from a hostile work environment. One of the board members attending via video spoke up, voicing concerns about liability and potential lawsuits from every former employee who'd had a bad experience. Patricia Wu stood from the back row. We're already looking at that liability. The NDAs in the sealed settlements were overly broad and may not be enforceable under current law. Former employees are already contacting employment attorneys. The question isn't whether we'll face lawsuits. It's whether we face them from a position of denial or a position of accountability. Harold Kushner, a board member in his 60s, crossed his arms and suggested the entire situation was an overreaction, calling it excessive to characterize Victor's demanding management as systematic discrimination. Marcus found himself standing before consciously deciding to. Mr. Kushner, with respect, I've analyzed every performance review Victor wrote over 6 years. When you control for actual performance metrics, sales numbers, client satisfaction, project completion, there's no correlation except demographic information. The pattern is statistically undeniable. That's not a management style. That's systematic bias implemented through coded language. Harold's face reddened, questioning Marcus's authority to make such determinations given his tenure of less than a year. I'm someone who knows how to read data without predetermined conclusions. I'm someone who talked to 12 former employees who described identical experiences years apart. I'm someone who found 4 sealed lawsuits that this company paid over $1 million to hide. The evidence doesn't care how long I've been here. Elena stood, drawing attention back to herself. Marcus presented facts to the board. Facts that I verified independently with Patricia and the investigation team. Whether you like those facts or find them inconvenient doesn't make them less true. We can argue about what they mean, but we can't pretend they don't exist. The debate continued for another 40 minutes, circling through the same arguments with varying degrees of heat. Finally, Robert Chen called for votes on each recommendation separately. Victor Sterling's termination, unanimous approval, referral to state authorities, 10 in favor, 2 abstentions, public acknowledgement of institutional failures, 8 in favor, 3 opposed, 1 abstention, independent oversight committee, unanimous approval, statement regarding Theodore Hartwell's leadership failures, 7 in favor, 4 opposed, 1 abstention. The final vote was close enough to feel like a knife edge. Elena's hands remained folded on the table, her expression composed despite the weight of what had just transpired. The motions carry. Patricia, you'll work with legal to draft appropriate public statements. Dr. Webb, thank you for your thorough work. This meeting is adjourned. People filed out slowly, some stopping to speak with Elena, others avoiding eye contact. Marcus waited until the room had mostly cleared before approaching her. You did the right thing. Then why does it feel like I just destroyed everything my father built? Because you're grieving the version of him you thought you knew. But Elena, the real him, made choices that hurt people. Acknowledging that isn't destruction. It's honesty. She looked at him with eyes that were dry but exhausted. He's going to hate me for this. Maybe. Or maybe eventually he'll understand that you loved him enough to tell the truth instead of protecting a comfortable lie. The press release went out at 4 p.m., carefully worded but unflinching in its acknowledgement of institutional failures. By 6, the business press had picked it up. By 8, reactions were flooding in. Praise for transparency mixed with criticism for airing internal problems publicly. Marcus picked up Zoe from after-school care, listening to her excited chatter about winning honorable mention at the science fair and how her poster would be displayed in the school newsletter. Can we get ice cream to celebrate? Absolutely, you earned it. At the ice cream shop, while Zoe worked on her chocolate chip cone, Marcus's phone kept buzzing with news alerts and messages from colleagues. He silenced it all and focused on his daughter, on this moment of uncomplicated joy in a week that had been anything but simple. That evening, after Zoe was asleep, Marcus sat in his quiet apartment and allowed himself to process everything that had happened. The investigation, the confrontation with Theodore, the board meeting, the public acknowledgement. They'd done it. They'd exposed the truth and started the work of rebuilding. His phone rang. Elena. Theodore called, said I humiliated him, said I chose you over family, hung up before I could respond. I'm sorry. This is putting you in an impossible position. No. He put himself in this position by enabling Victor for 15 years. I'm just refusing to continue the cover-up. That's not choosing you over him. That's choosing truth over comfortable fiction. They talked for an hour, decompressing from the stress of public scrutiny, planning for what came next. 3 former employees had already filed lawsuits challenging their NDA agreements. A shareholder group was demanding additional board oversight. The state had opened a formal investigation, but there was also support. Messages from employees thanking Elena for her courage. Former employees expressing relief that their experiences were finally being validated. Industry colleagues praising the company's transparency. 8 weeks after the board meeting, Victor Sterling's wrongful termination lawsuit was dismissed. The judge ruled that the independent investigation's findings provided clear justification for termination with cause. Victor's attorney announced plans to appeal, but legal experts suggested the case was weak. The same week, 2 of the former employees' lawsuits settled with terms that included not just financial compensation, but formal apologies and agreements to implement specific policy changes. "We're turning a corner," Patricia told Marcus. "Still a long way to go, but we're moving in the right direction." On a Saturday morning in late November, Marcus took Zoe to Lincoln Park to check on the cherry tree they'd planted for Lisa. It had grown noticeably over the months, new branches reaching upward, leaves thick and green even as autumn approached. "It's getting strong," Zoe observed. "Like us." "Like us," Marcus agreed. Elena joined them at the park, bringing coffee for Marcus and hot chocolate for Zoe. They sat on the grass together, the 3 of them, watching the tree sway gently in the breeze. "Miss Elena, when are you and Daddy getting married?" Zoe asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Elena laughed, glancing at Marcus. "That's a good question. What do you think, Marcus?" He looked at the 2 of them, his daughter with her gap-toothed smile and boundless optimism, and Elena with her strength and vulnerability and willingness to do hard things, and felt something settle into place in his chest. "I think," he said slowly, "that when people find something worth keeping, they should hold on to it." He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. Elena's eyes widened. "I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. But Zoe's right. Why wait?" He opened the box to reveal a simple ring, elegant without being ostentatious. "Elena Hartwell, you've challenged me to be better, braver, more honest than I thought I could be. You've shown Zoe what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. Will you marry us?" Elena's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, God, yes," Zoe cheered, jumping up and down with pure 8-year-old joy. "I get to be the flower girl, right?" "Of course you do," Elena laughed, pulling both of them into a hug. They stayed at the park for another hour, making plans and dreaming about the future. Marcus looked at Lisa's tree, its branches reaching toward the sky, and felt grateful for the love he'd known and the love he'd found. They weren't replacing each other. They were proof that hearts could grow, that families could rebuild, that life could surprise you with second chances when you least expected them. 6 months later, on a perfect spring Saturday, Marcus and Elena got married in a small ceremony at Lincoln Park, 50 feet from Lisa's cherry tree. Zoe served as flower girl, walking down the makeshift aisle with perfect seriousness before breaking into a huge grin when she reached the front. Theodore Hartwell didn't attend. Elena had called to invite him, but he'd declined, saying he needed more time. She'd been sad, but not surprised. DeAndre served as best man, giving a toast about accidentally texted messages and the universe's strange sense of humor. Patricia Wu and Rosa Martinez were there, along with 12 of the 29 employees whose cases had been documented, all of them witnesses to the fact that speaking truth could lead to change. During the ceremony, the officiant spoke about families built through choice rather than just biology, about love that honored the past while embracing the future, about courage in the face of opposition. When Marcus and Elena exchanged vows, he promised to support her battles for justice, to stand beside her when standing was hard, to build with her something better than what came before. Elena promised to love Zoe as fiercely as she loved him, to honor Lisa's memory, to never stop fighting for what was right, even when it cost her everything. They sealed their promises with a kiss, while Zoe cheered and their small gathering of witnesses applauded. At the reception afterward, a casual affair at a nearby restaurant, Marcus found himself standing next to Rosa Martinez, who had been the quiet hero of the entire investigation. "Thank you," he told her, "for documenting everything, for being brave enough to keep evidence even when it felt hopeless." Rosa smiled. "I'm just glad someone finally listened. You gave voice to something I'd been screaming silently for years. We did it together, all of us." Later, as the sun began to set, Marcus stood with Elena and Zoe near Lisa's tree. The cherry blossoms had bloomed weeks earlier and were now gone, but new leaves covered every branch, thick and vibrant. "Mommy would have liked this," Zoe said quietly. "She would have liked you, Miss Elena. I mean, Mom Elena." It was the first time she'd dropped the miss, and Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so." Marcus looked at his new wife and his daughter, at the tree that represented loss and growth and the passage of time. 4 years ago, he'd thought his life was over, that he'd never love again, never feel whole again, never be anything more than a man going through the motions, but he'd been wrong. Life had surprised him. A stupid text message had led to a job, which led to uncovering injustice, which led to love, which led to this moment, standing between past and future, honoring both, belonging to both. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked. "That beautiful things don't have to last forever to matter. They just have to be beautiful while they're here." Lisa's philosophy. Yeah, but I think I'm finally understanding what she meant. It's not about how long something lasts. It's about being brave enough to appreciate it while you have it. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, the city stretching out below them, full of possibility and challenge and the promise of tomorrow. 29 employees had received validation and compensation. Policies had changed. Culture was shifting, slowly but measurably. Victor Sterling had been held accountable. Theodore Hartwell's legacy was complicated now, no longer purely heroic, but more honest. And Marcus had learned that doing the right thing, even when it cost you sleep and comfort and relationships, was always worth it. Because the alternative was complicity. And complicity was a price his conscience could never afford to pay. "Ready to go?" Elena asked. "Everyone's waiting to toast the bride and groom." "Ready. Zoe, can we come back tomorrow to check on the tree?" "Every Sunday," Marcus promised. "That's our family tradition now." They walked back toward the restaurant, the three of them, a family built through loss and choice and the courage to try again. Behind them, Lisa's tree swayed in the evening breeze, its branches reaching upward, its roots growing deeper, a living testament to the truth that endings and beginnings were often the same moment, viewed from different angles. Marcus had started with a mistake, an accidentally sent text that should have ended his career. Instead, it had become the beginning of everything, a relationship that challenged him, a fight for justice that mattered, a family that chose each other deliberately, eyes open, hearts willing. Was it perfect? No. Was it easy? Definitely not. But it was real and honest and built on a foundation of truth rather than comfortable lies. And that, Marcus thought, as he held the door open for his wife and daughter, was worth more than perfect ever could be. Inside, their friends and colleagues raised glasses in their honor. Outside, the city hummed with its endless motion. And somewhere between those two realities, the intimate and the infinite, Marcus Thompson had found his place. Not as the man he'd been before loss, and not as the man he'd been in the depths of grief, but as someone new. Someone who'd learned that strength came from vulnerability, that love multiplied rather than divided, and that the right thing was always worth doing, even when, especially when, it cost you everything. The celebration continued into the night, filled with laughter and stories and hope for the future. And when it finally ended, when Marcus and Elena drove home with Zoe asleep in the back seat, the city lights reflecting off glass towers like a million promises, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Not the erasure of pain, but the integration of it into something larger. Not forgetting what came before, but building something worthy on top of it. He reached across the center console and took Elena's hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For being brave enough to love me. For showing Zoe what integrity looks like. For all of it. Thank you for accidentally texting me. Best mistake either of us ever made." "Not a mistake," Marcus said, echoing words Elena had once said to him. "Fate. You believe in fate now?" "I believe in us. That's close enough." They drove through the quiet streets, past the apartment building where Marcus and Zoe lived, though soon they'd be moving into Elena's larger place, blending their lives more completely. Past the Blackstone Media Building where so much had changed. Past Lincoln Park where Lisa's tree stood guard over memory and growth. At home, Marcus carried Zoe inside and tucked her into bed, still in her flower girl dress because she'd fallen asleep on the drive, and he didn't want to wake her. He stood watching her sleep for a moment. This child who'd been brave enough to accept change, to open her heart to someone new, to trust that loving Elena didn't mean forgetting Lisa. Elena appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. "She's amazing." "She is. You both are." They retreated to the living room, sitting together on the couch in the quiet apartment, processing the enormity of the day. Married. A family. A future unfolding in ways neither of them had imagined 6 months ago when Marcus had walked into that boardroom with a USB drive and a prayer. "Do you think Theodore will ever come around?" Marcus asked. "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But I can't control that. I can only control whether I'm living according to my values or compromising them for comfort." "You chose values. We chose values. You, me, Patricia, Rosa, all 29 employees who were brave enough to speak up. We chose truth over convenience. That has to matter." "It does matter. It already has. Company culture is changing. People feel safer reporting problems. The oversight committee is working. Your leadership is setting a new standard." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm tired, Marcus. Tired of fighting. Tired of defending. Tired of being strong all the time." "Then rest. That's what partnership means. When you're tired, I'll carry the weight. And when I'm tired, you'll carry it for me. We take turns being strong." "That sounds nice." "It is nice. We're going to be okay, Elena. Better than okay. We're going to build something remarkable." They sat in comfortable silence, the city lights filtering through the windows, the distant sound of traffic, a lullaby of urban life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Always did. But tonight, they could rest. They could celebrate. They could be simply and completely themselves, with no performance required. Marcus's phone buzzed one last time. A message from DeAndre. "Proud of you, brother. You did something that mattered. Lisa would be proud too." He showed it to Elena, who smiled through fresh tears. "She would be, wouldn't she?" "Yeah, she would be." Marcus replied to DeAndre with a simple, "Thanks. For everything. For being there. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Then he silenced his phone completely, set it aside, and pulled Elena closer. First day of marriage. How does it feel? Terrifying. Wonderful. Right. Yeah, all of that. They stayed on the couch until nearly midnight, talking about nothing and everything, plans for the honeymoon, ideas for blending households, Zoe's upcoming field trip, work challenges ahead, hopes and dreams and fears and promises. Eventually, exhaustion won. They moved to the bedroom, changed out of wedding clothes, and climbed into bed. Elena curled against Marcus, her breathing gradually slowing as sleep claimed her. Marcus lay awake a while longer, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange path that had led him here. An accidental text, a second chance, a relationship built in the midst of corporate warfare, a fight for justice that could have cost them everything but instead had given them more than they'd imagined. 29 people validated, policies changed, a company beginning to live up to its stated values, a family rebuilt on foundations of honesty and choice. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Marcus closed his eyes, Lisa's face appearing in his mind one last time. Not with guilt or grief, but with gratitude. She'd taught him how to love. She'd given him Zoe. She'd made him promise to keep fighting for what was right. He'd kept that promise, and in keeping it, he'd found a future worth living. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For everything. For Zoe. For teaching me what matters. For making me promise to be brave. I hope I'm making you proud." No answer came, but he felt something shift. A lightness. A release. A sense of permission to fully embrace what came next without apologizing for it. Marcus slept deeply that night, dreamlessly, his arm around his wife, his daughter safe down the hall, his conscience clear and his heart full. The next morning, they would begin their life together officially. But tonight, in the quiet hours between one day and the next, Marcus Thompson was simply a man who'd done the right thing, loved the right people, and found his way home through darkness into light. And that, truly, was enough.